Hey, Trevor. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. I had to change the setting. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
absolutely. I can hear you
Okay.
now. You got me?
Good deal. Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Hey, man, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out.
Oh man, I'm a
Glad to be
longtime
here.
fan. Just yeah. So yeah, you've made my top 25 list, and so I was like, oh my God, Trevor reached back out. This is awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That's fun. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you send it to my Facebook and then it took a while for me to see it or something like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. That's the only way I knew how to reach out to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
and it
glad you
did.
did.
Oh no, absolutely. I've met so many people since I left public education in 2015 and started consulting.
Yeah.
And so, when I see like Todd Nesloni and a lot of the people that you're in the speaker group with, I
Yep.
think you've made some connections with. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we've had some of those speakers come to our conference. We hold a
Okay.
conference every October, November, and so that's where I've met like Michael Bonner, uh,
Okay.
Ron Clark, Joe Dombrowski, other
Yep.
other other educators that are kind of
Love
making
those
flash.
guys.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
for me, I was just a teacher, a principal, coach. I was a coach in Texas, and then
Yep.
I was on the first campus to pilot restorative practices back in 2012.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I spent 3
Mhm.
years on a campus, and then the state of Texas said we want to do some training, and so I took a leap of faith and left public education to just push that platform.
Yes.
And it's turned into 5 years later. I own National Educators for Restorative Practices, and all we do is train, coach, teach, and support
Hmm.
in building relationships for teachers and then finding alternatives to suspensions for administrators. So that's what I
Yes.
do full time.
I love it. I mean, that's the dream. And it's worked for you.
Oh, it's probably been, and I tell people this all the time, even though 17 years in public education, like this was where I was like, okay, now I'm in my jam. Now
That's right.
I'm making not that I wasn't making a difference with kids and teachers and
Yep.
don't, but this, I'm making an impact. And I tell people I'm a disruptor, I'm a difference maker.
Yeah.
I love the box was what was like confining me of what
Mhm.
education thinks we need to be, and I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
And the pandemic hit, and then schools closed, we
I
closed.
I know.
So it was like all of a sudden, so then I said, if I can't leave my house and get out in front of schools, then I'm going to start a podcast. And
Yeah, I
so
love it.
yeah,
Yes.
and it's all about how do we keep relationships at the
Mhm.
center of learning in the classroom and in the buildings for staff
Love it.
connections. And so it's real simple. What I'll do is I'll do the intro later after the
Okay.
show on some, hey, this is, some tidbits of today.
Yep.
I'll just welcome you to the show. We'll start up with what I call the flip five. I ask you five. We always, what we call GTKY. We model
Mhm.
this. We always say connections before content. So I figured the best thing to do is also get to know you on the show. I'll ask you five simple, shallow, just get to know you
Cool.
questions, and then you'll flip five back at me.
Okay.
So just five simple. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I
Easy.
can get it.
Okay, and then we'll jump right in. And I have no script. I mean, I literally I
Sweet.
want people to know who you are.
Yep.
Yes, I want them. And then what I want to do is kind of know people who you were as a teacher, what got you
Mm.
into education, how you kind of started using that as your platform. And then
Yeah.
towards the end of the show, I want people to know about your courses and how to get a hold of you.
Sweet.
This is a great opportunity to promote that.
Love it.
And then other than that, we just have fun.
All right. Well, rock and roll. It sounds good to me.
All right, brother, let's get started.
All right.
Welcome to the Relationship Centered Learning Podcast, where we put relationships at the center of all learning. I am super pumped, excited to have Trevor on the show today. Hey, welcome to the show, Trevor.
Hey, Kevin, thanks so much for letting me be on.
Absolutely, brother. Hey, so just like we do in the classroom, we always want to preach connections before content. So we do that in what we call the GTKY format. That's simple five simple questions I'm going to ask you, and you flip five back at me. So I'm going to start off with one simple question to start off with. Number one, how do you like your eggs?
Oh, gosh, sunny side up, period.
Me too. That's
I,
awesome. Yeah.
I think that's the only way they should be cooked, but
I'm with you on that. All right. So when you put your shoes and socks on, are you a sock shoe or a sock shoe? How do you put your socks or your shoes on?
definitively sock, shoe.
Okay.
And I used to do sock, shoe, tie one shoe, tie the other shoe. But now I like to put them on, tie the shoe, and then put the other shoe on and tie it. It's a choice.
I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, these are the little things that we just want to know about Trevor.
What's so funny is nobody in my entire life has ever asked me, and yet I can tell you instantly. These are the things.
I know. See,
that's what's next. What's number 3?
Number 3, just a simple thing as this. If I was coming to your hometown, where is somewhere you would have to take me? You'd be like, Kevin, I got to take you here.
Ooh, I would take you on a hike.
Okay.
So there's this park not far from me. It's called Seidman Park, and it's just gorgeous. And there's creeks and hills, and you can catch crawdads and snakes and it's wonderful. That's where I'd take you.
All right. So number 4, growing up, what was that one meal or like a sandwich or something that your mom made you that you always look forward to?
My mom could cook some food. The very best meal is fried chicken. So I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan now, but I grew up down in Southwest Florida. And not by the beach and not by Disney World, but actually like a little bit in the country of Florida, which is a rare thing. And so my mom was just this master Southern cook. She still is. And her fried chicken with collard greens just rocks my world.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 5. If you were switching places with me right now and behind you said the Relationship Centered Learning Podcast, who would you interview?
Ooh, I would interview my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Peters.
Okay, so you're going to make sure
I'd talk to my 6th grade teacher.
Okay, so then we're going to make that happen, Trevor. We're going to come back. No, I want to do it. That's why I asked that question. I'm selfish. I want to know who would Trevor think to be on this show, and I think that says a lot about what that person means to you. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. And I'll
all right, brother.
About him in a bit. So.
Okay, so 5 questions back at me.
All right, what's your favorite reptile?
Reptile. Ooh, that's a really good one. I would probably say crocodile.
Crocodile, saltwater crocodile,
saltwater
crocodile, American. Okay, saltwater crocodile. Yeah, it's the biggest.
Yeah, absolutely. They're amazing. Ooh, yeah, powerful.
If you could go relive 1 year of your life, what age would you choose?
Oh man, if I could.
Not including this one. Hopefully, you're living your best life right now. But you go back in time.
I got you. Let's just say when I was 13.
13. I love it. What is that, 8th grade?
Yep, absolutely. 8th grade. Yeah. I had a decision to go between 2 different high schools. It was a real pivotal point in my life. And I'm thinking like, man, that would be a really good point to go back and just relive that 1 year for me.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I did. Don't get me wrong. Good. There's a lot. It's interesting because it's almost like the butterfly effect. I had the choice of going to 2 different high schools. All my siblings went to one, and then they rezoned me for another one, and they gave me a choice. And so I always look back at that pivotal point because like not that I would change it, but the other school was very successful in athletics. And I played football. I met people and I knew people from there. And I always just wonder what would it have been like if I'd have went left instead of right.
All right. Love it. And so let's go with football. What do you think requires more toughness, football or rugby?
Oh my God, I would think rugby. I have a friend of mine who was actually a strength and conditioning coach with the San Antonio Spurs, where I live here, and he posts nothing but he trains and coaches for rugby athletes. Okay. And I watch him and I watch the things he posts, Trevor, and I would say hands down, rugby.
Period. I know.
I mean, it's not even like close. I mean, I watch the things that he makes those guys train for, and then you watch what they go through. And I'm just being honest. Now I watch NFL football, and I watched it yesterday, and unfortunately, I am a Cowboys fan. So, but the bad part is I watch it and I'm like, you can't even touch each other anymore. The way, like, it's just like
it's sport.
It's completely different. Oh yeah. So
one time I was in Australia and I was, I got to hang out with a rugby player for a while, and this guy was 6'7", probably like 280 pounds, just an absolute beast. And he was talking all about rugby and losing teeth and all this stuff. I was like, so what do you guys do for fun? He's like, oh, we like to tackle roos. I was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? He's like, oh, at nighttime we ride around on our Jeep and we spotlight with our spotty. And if we see a kangaroo, we tackle it. And I'm like, and you got to forgive my accent there. Yeah. But I mean, like this guy literally, like his activity is to tackle like 8-foot tall kangaroos out in the outback. And I was just like, you are a tough man. Like,
Yes.
I would not want
Yes.
you to be, I don't want to be blindsided by you.
Absolutely. Oh my God. That's a
So,
great story. All right.
all
That's
right.
three.
Is that only three? I better
Yep.
pick it up.
No, you got
I
two
better.
more.
All right. Two more. Cats or dogs?
Dogs all day long.
Period. You have one?
I got three Australian shepherds, miniatures.
Nice. Do they have
Yeah.
accents?
No, but it's just so funny when you were using the accent. It made me think of the Australian Shepherd. But yes, no accents. But I've never owned cats, so I can't.
Mm.
But I've only owned dogs my entire life, and I live in love for dogs. They're
All right. I
they're
love
they're
it.
amazing.
All right. Last question. If you could interview somebody who is no longer with us, who would it be?
Ooh, wow. Okay, I would have to think. I would like to interview probably if I man, there's so many different people that are really quickly rushing into my mind. Um, and I'm going to throw a loop at you, and I'm going to interview my grandfather. And here's
Okay.
why: never met him.
Hmm.
Never met either one of my grandfathers on either side, paternal or
Wow.
so I would choose either one of them, but I never met either one of them. And I only met my dad's mom once, and my mom's mom I was closer to out of all grandparents. So I didn't
Yeah.
really have that grandparent experience.
Mm-hmm.
But recently I turned 51 a couple weeks ago, and I'm on ancestry.com. I did the 23andMe, but I started looking into the history, and I started just really starting to look at some of those things, and I was like, man, I wish I would have just met my grandfather, like just had a great
Yeah.
conversation with him, know a little something about him. So that's a good question.
Yeah, and I actually heard last week. I've been meaning to track it down, but I heard there's research that shows that we form neurological connections stronger with the generation before our parents than even our own parents, and that's why even if you've never met your grandparent, there's a good chance that you share something very deeply in common with them, and that if you did have the opportunity to meet them, you would probably have a deep connection with them on a very like almost intangible, but actually neurological level, which I
Wow.
just think is so fascinating.
Oh no, life is fascinating like that.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, but hey, man, those are great questions. Thanks, man. You're right off the cuff. You rocked the connection before content.
Okay.
So we model that just for the listeners. So remember, connections before content. If you are looking for an opportunity to use those types of questions in the classroom, all you need to do is head over to the website at rclfirst.com. You can click on the link and you can sign up for 28 GTKY questions. You can go back into the classroom and use them with your students, or if you're an administrator, you can use them with your staff to use connections before content in the classroom or on the campus. So as we get into this, Trevor, as I mentioned earlier, I have been a fan of yours. I know you hear this all the time. I no, and the reason I say that is because you make such an impact. But I
Mm,
think one of the things that was really hard for me to understand is when you start making an impact, you don't realize who you're making an impact with all the time. So, it's nice, Trevor, when you get to see people in person and they get to say like, thank you for today, or thank you for the
mm-hmm.
message, or whatever it is. Right. But I will tell you, I have referenced your videos throughout our trainings throughout the last 5 years. I have referenced who you are and what you preach and teach about. I have just referenced you in general as one of those educators that I have said, look, it can be done different,
Mm.
right? Listen to what this man has to say, because it sounds crazy, Trevor, but it's so simplistic of your message of
Mm.
what you represent in teachers in the classroom, right? So just to start off, I want people to know who you are, just as a general person, as an educator. So can you just kind of take us to who you are and give us a little bit of insight to who Trevor is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate those kind words. I mean, and I love that you said it's simple. And it's like, yes, everything we both of us, the work we do is very simple. Um, but with that simplicity comes a lot of complexity, right? Like,
Well said.
eh, and so you to tell you about who I am. You asked me earlier who I would interview. I had a teacher in sixth grade named Mr. Peters, and this was the same year, sixth grade, when my parents got divorced. And my grandmother, who lived in my home, died of alcoholism. And my mom became a single mother of 5 kids. And we had to deal with trauma and just difficulties like I've never had to face since. I mean, we've had plenty of different challenges throughout life, but that was the toughest year of my whole life. And I'll never forget this guy, Mr. Peters, who just deeply invested in me, asking questions, building a relationship, just loving me in a way that nobody else really was able to during that year of life. And that just had a deep impact on me. And that's why when I got to the end of college with no idea what I wanted to do with my life, I remember like doing some deep thinking, some exegizing for my own life, like what has got me to where I am now. And this guy, Mr. Peters, kept popping up into my head. Like, and I started through a whole chain of events. I decided, you know what, this is what I want to do with my life, is I want to help students. I want to help people, you know, find ways to succeed and achieve greatness and love their lives. And so like, to me, it all started back there in 6th grade with Mr. Peters. And that just set me on this track to become a high school teacher, which I did for a while. I worked with middle school students. I'm working with future teachers now at a university. But a lot of my time is spent working with other teachers now, helping them figure out different ways and ideas, really just to capture kids' hearts and get them engaged and excited about learning, which has a lot of, there's definitely a long-lasting effect when we do that with kids. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and my work is really just kind of based on how do you do that and what are some things you can do to make it work.
Absolutely. No, I love the realism of when you talk and you present, like the story, was it, and I apologize, I've heard so many of your different things, but was it the rabbit that got out in the class? Was it the
Oh,
rabbit?
the goats, the baby
goats,
goats.
the baby goats, right? So when you told the baby goat story, man, it was like, holy cow, you could literally feel your world just coming, like crashing down with everything going on, right?
Yes. Yeah, well, and the idea is like, listen, I mean, the story is like, I had a student bring in baby goats and they got out, and I got in a lot of trouble, and they ran out in the hallway and pooped next to a board member, and my principal flipped her lid. Like, and it's a very specific story to me, but when I tell that story, the reason that people all over the place love to watch that video and hear that story isn't just because of pure entertainment. It's because if you're a teacher, you know all about things going nuts in the classroom. You know all about unplanned events happening. And so like, it's just like, how do I connect with you on that? How do we tell stories that you can connect with and hopefully inspires you to go back to work with positivity and just an attitude, this mindset that, hey, if things go wrong, we can turn this into a good thing.
So earlier, I love the fact that you were vulnerable enough to mention how you had a struggle when you were growing up. Did you ever find yourself when you were a teacher using that past experiences that you have had personally to help other students kind of overcome some obstacles currently that they were experiencing in their life? Did you ever kind of use that as a connection?
Yeah, every day. I mean, that's one of the hardest lessons I had to learn as a young teacher was vulnerability is required. You know, you have to share your own life, maybe not every single detail of it, but you have to share this fact that you are not just this blank slate who comes to class simply to deliver content information, but that you actually have to let your students know that you're human and that you have a story too. Right? Like that's something that I spend a lot of time talking about and making videos about. My first book is all about, is this fact that we are all characters within our own stories. Like we're heroes on the hero's journey. And we experience challenges and obstacles and mistakes, and we encounter guides and mentors along the way. And I think with students, it's really important that teachers let them know that we are heroes on our own journey as well. And we've experienced challenges and screwed up and went through it all too. And because what I've found is that when I'm more vulnerable with my students, they all of a sudden are more vulnerable with me. That, I mean, when I talk about, yeah, my parents got divorced, or yeah, I got in a little bit of trouble in high school, or yeah, I cheated on a test and got in trouble in college, or whatever it is, when I let them know that, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this guy cares enough about us to tell us his true story. Maybe that will make me lean in a little bit more in class. Maybe that'll make me, maybe this guy will maybe I can trust this guy with my own story.
Right.
Because as you know, I mean, it's the center of your work. When you have this real relationship with kids, there's going to be a much greater effect than just all of a sudden we've got this relationship. All of a sudden kids engage more in class. All of a sudden kids are developing more socially when there's a relationship there. You know, there's cognitive development when kids feel safe and have a relationship with their teacher. And so really it's the foundation for everything. But to do that, I think you've got to have vulnerability and be honest and real with kids.
So earlier you had just mentioned now you're currently working with new teachers or teachers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Outside. So one of the things that I'm sure you've experienced, that I've experienced as a struggle, is how do we get teachers to not just comprehend and understand what you just said? How do we get them to like model or show or demonstrate? Because there is either a lack of comfortableness that everybody is not as
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable as Trevor and Kevin, right?
That's right.
Or I've seen two things, or seen multiple things, but the two ones is, one, it's just not me, or two, I'm apprehensive because my experience or something taught me that if I do this, this cuts against the grain of what education is really focusing on, which is about curriculum and standardized scores and things. And so you have this kind of pressure that puts us in difficult situations, because even if I hear Trevor tell me that message and it digest it and I understand it, but for them, their reality is, okay, Trevor, you're not in my class under these circumstances. And let's forget the pandemic for a minute. I'm just talking normal, regular teaching.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, when is it okay to go there? And how do I do that? And then how do I get the kids back? Like, there's so many little navigation points. So how do you help teachers navigate through those?
You know, I mean, I start with, I get it, right? Like I get that apprehension. Let's not whitewash it. It's hard. It's difficult being vulnerable. You know, vulnerability is there's a danger to it. You're opening yourself up. It's like exposing your ribs, right? Like there's a danger to it. And so I get it, or at least there's a potential. It feels like, yeah, I don't know if I want to let them in on my life like this. And so I get it. So I start with that. But then anytime I'm with a group of teachers, I can say, this is a reflection question I often ask when I speak live. Do you remember being with people in person, by the way? Do you remember live speaking?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Many years ago. So one of the questions I ask is, hey, write down the name of a teacher who had an impact on you. And I mean, it literally takes 5 seconds to be able to bring them back, because everybody has that teacher. At least one teacher from their 13 years in K-12 education can remember that one teacher who had an impact on you, right? Like, let me ask you, Kevin, like name a teacher who's had an impact on you.
Debbie Bagby.
There we go. What did Debbie, and this is what I would, okay, you've got your teacher written down. Mm-hmm. Why do you remember that teacher's name?
That teacher was like a mother to me. She cared about me inside the classroom, outside the classroom. Like there's no way to describe. It was nowhere near the content nor the curriculum about that teacher. She cared about me as a human being. And I always say every student wants to feel valued, seen, and heard. She was the first teacher that truly made me feel valued, seen, and heard.
Yes. And you know what? When she did that, that was going against the grain, because that's not the norm all the time, especially back before we were talking about SEL and developing deep connections and relationships and reformative practices. And so she was going against the grain, and yet that happened. And I can name a few teachers from my life, Mrs. Bandy, Mrs. Schwanier, Mr. Peters, these teachers who are vulnerable and leaned into relationship first. And because of that, all the academic growth followed after. But I can name those teachers, and I would ask any teacher, can you name somebody? The answer is almost always yes. Why? Because of the relationship. Well, then there's your evidence. You know what I mean? Like, I get that there's this fear to it, but look at the own anecdotal evidence that you have from your own life, that you've seen this have an impact on you, like that, you know this. And so I would start there. Look at your own story. You know, don't just take my word for it. You're like, look at your own. But then also there is just great research that shows that when we develop relationships, it's going to have all of these other benefits. And so like when we say like, oh, the norm is to focus on test scores. The norm is to focus on content area growth and understanding. Okay, that's the norm. I know, it kind of makes you sick to say that, but okay, it's the norm. Well, when you develop a strong relationship with students, you're going to see growth in those areas anyway. So it's not like there's a sacrifice that happens. I remember I had this one student, I won't say his real name. Let's call him Daryl. I had a student named Daryl who was absolutely, what's a nice way of putting it? A terror. That when I got to know him at first, he was a senior in high school. No, I'm sorry. He was a sophomore in high school and just terrorized every one of his teachers. And he was kicked out of class all the time and suspended all the time and basically had his own desk and in-school suspension. He was a difficult kid, and he was a difficult kid for me at the beginning of the year too. And it was hard. And I wanted to kick this kid out all the time because he just had no respect for me or my classroom or his classmates. And so, like, I won't sugarcoat it. He was a hard kid, but I'll never forget. I asked Daryl one day, I was like, hey man, what do you like to do after school? He's like, man, I hate after school. I was like, why? Like, why do you hate it? He's like, because I don't have a car and my mom makes me go home. I was like, well, can't you hang out in your neighborhood? He's like, no, she doesn't want me to get picked up by a gang. And so I'm not allowed to leave my house. And then I found out that Daryl, he told me, he's like, I fail on purpose. I was like, why? And he's like, because in summer school, that's the only reason my mom will let me leave the house in the summer, is to go to summer school. She doesn't let me play sports, doesn't let me hang out with friends, because she wants to keep me off the street. And so if I can get into summer school, I get to at least leave my house a little bit in the summer. And it was like my world was rocked by that. Like, I never heard anything like that in my life until I started listening to other kids tell me the same kind of thing. Like, this was a new experience for me. And so all of a sudden, because I asked him this question, every day he started hanging out and wanted to tell me more about his own life. And I shared a little bit more about my own life. And all of a sudden, this relationship was forming. And this kid would try to, I didn't always allow it, but he wanted to have every lunch with me. And he would show up before school every day because he just wanted to talk. And it was like this moment where I'm like, shoot, this kid isn't just a terror. This kid comes from poverty. This kid doesn't have a dad in his home. Like, this kid has just been kicked out his entire life because life is hard, and he's doing it on purpose. So he doesn't have to go to school, so he doesn't have to sit at home in the summer. And also, when this relationship was formed and I could start having real talks with him, and when I had to come down on him and show him discipline, he would listen to me. And all of a sudden, this kid started working in my class. All of a sudden, he passed my English class, his first real passing of a class his entire life. And I'm like, you know what? This isn't because of me. This is because we formed a relationship, and that led to him engaging more in ways that he's never done before. Or, you know what I mean? I'm sure you've seen this in your own life.
No, I love it though. No, it's so interesting because even though our paths have not professionally crossed, I start out every training very similar to what you just said. I always say, I want you to imagine that teacher, but I take it one step further. I say, don't write down the teacher's name. Write down what that teacher is focused on more in the classroom than anything else to help you be successful.
Oh, I love that.
So I took it one more deeper, right? So I say, capture the teacher, but then write down and I tell them, I don't want a list of 5 things, 10 things, one thing. What is that one thing that teacher focused on more than anything else to help you be successful in the classroom?
And what are some typical responses?
Oh, you get it, Trevor, but here's what's interesting. At first I started doing it. This was interesting. I stumbled across this. This wasn't a research base. So I tell people all the time, they're like, Kevin, you've published a book. You're an expert. I tell people all the time, I'm experienced. You know what I'm experienced in? Jacking this up since 2012. And I tell them, I stumbled across this by simply having discussions. But then, Trevor, what we did is we started writing it on Post-it notes. And then I would have my team collect the Post-it notes, and we would make a big mirage of how they grouped. So then we started taking pictures of them, and I started putting it into the training. And so you would see how many would either write the word relationship or the word relationship was in a phrase. I would tell them one word or one phrase. Some people felt handcuffed with one word. So then we would have caring, loving, compassionate, investment in meeting needs, selfless, real, authentic. And what I tell them is look, now look at all these words up here that we just all posted by simply asking to reflect, who is that a great, amazing teacher in your life, right? So then I tell them, look up there. Anybody see the word content or curriculum anywhere?
Does anybody see makes great worksheets?
I know, but see what I'm saying? See, and so Trevor, all of a sudden, we're beginning the day. And what I've learned in this, my niche is I use your words against you. I'm like, look, I didn't even, and what I don't do, Trevor, is I don't give them any, like, what about this word? I don't
Yeah,
say anything.
that's
So,
exactly right.
so then they're all of a sudden looking up at all these words and they're just like, oh, and I'm like, so isn't it ironic that everybody in this room, data comes back and tells us that the best amazing teachers that you had experience in your life weren't about worksheets, weren't about content, weren't about curriculum, any of that other stuff. So if I can get you to right now take your eyes off of content, curriculum, and focus, and let's go into what I call the 3 zones of learning. And I break it down, Trevor, like this: there's content, curriculum, and connections. And I think for me, and I really want to get your opinion on this. Content is the biggest driving. We know it's the biggest driver of why we're there, but it's the supporting of around it that really helps content, as you mentioned earlier, be successful. But here's what I notice: content and correct, I always talk about discipline referrals, attendance, disproportionality. I mean, all the other areas of where we correct students to change their behavior or their grades or attendance. But I tell them, you realize out of those 2 zones, those are the only 2 that in education we're held accountable for.
That's right.
So what happens is when I say, what about the 3rd zone of connecting? There is no accountability for connections. There's no relationship report, right?
Yep.
This is my hypothesis, Trevor. I believe until education changes the framework and holds us accountable for making connections with kids, the needle is going to move very slowly. Because if you look at it as educators, we're good soldiers. Just tell us what to do.
Yep.
And 80% of that staff will tell us what to do. 10% will always exceed. 10% will never do anything anyways. So go with the 80%. If the 80% say, tell us what to do, nobody's telling them that their job status and their evaluations and everything else surrounding that, and even pay incentives. There's districts in Texas that use incentives for pay on how they get evaluated. None of those things will reference connections or relationships. So therefore, a teacher says, I hear you, Trevor and Kevin. That all sounds great. But in my world and in my reality, I ain't getting graded on connections and relationships. And what we've tried to do, as you've mentioned, indirectly say, I tell them, we lean into James Comer's quote, no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. And so I tell them, if you want significant scores, you need significant learning. And the only way that you're going to get significant learning is with significant relationships. Period. So what I'm trying to get you to do today is, and if you'll invest in that, I promise you'll see significant learning. You'll get the significant scores. You'll get the evaluations you're looking for. But it's that trust factor of navigating around, but nobody's holding me accountable for this. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, a ditto, right? Like I feel like everything we're saying is that's what I'm preaching. And you know, like something I really is heavy on my heart lately is the idea that school only focuses on content, or at least that's what the measures are, focused on content, but there is so much more to a whole child and what they're capable of, and success factors. You know what I mean? Like they surveyed 3,000 different employers recently, asking what are the number 1 skills sought by employers. And the top 4 are all these soft skills, essential skills: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, organization, and analyzing time. And number 5 on it is content knowledge and the ability to retain and process information. So it's still important, but it's number 5 on the list. And yet that's the one that's on the SAT and the ACT. And that's the one that teachers, their success is measured on their successfulness is how well are your students learning this number 5 on the top 5 skills list. And so like one of the things I talk about a lot is like, you know what, if we don't put collaboration and critical thinking and communication, if we don't put these in the grade book, students are going to continue to see them as secondary, right? Those are always going to be like, okay, I'll do my content and then this. But if it's secondary, if it's not helping them meet success, then it's like, well, then I'm just not going to do it very well. And that's why I think we have this whole society right now that is deeply struggling with collaboration and communicating ideas. And so like, to me, there's like an analogy there. It's the same reason students might not participate in a group project because they know it's not going in the grade book. The same reason a lot of teachers, unfortunately, whether they're choosing to or they don't have the capacity to, aren't emphasizing relationships enough, Because it's like, oh, this isn't in my evaluation.
Mhm.
This it, you know, when I see like schools being closed, these schools in Michigan have been closed not too long ago, and they're doing it based on test scores. They're failing schools. I'm doing quotes. I know we're on a podcast. They're failing schools because students aren't getting their content academic scores up. It's like, that's one measure of success. What if there was rubrics that you use to evaluate? Yeah, but are teachers forming connections? Are kids staying in school longer because of those teachers? You know, are suspensions down? Are we having to call the police less? Are we eliminating hunger in this district through this school system? Like, those are measures that matter more than content scores, right? Those are success indicators. And so therefore, I'm 100% with you. Those have got to be emphasized in all 14,000 school districts.
Well said.
Right?
No, well, because it's like you said, and this is why I say education is the box. The box is archaic, and it's been shaped through the last century of, like you said, pointing us in one direction. College readiness, SAT, ACT,
Yeah.
you know, and what's interesting is I imagine I was on one of the podcasts and we were talking about like school is like a highway, a massive sets of highways, but we're all pointing everybody to one exit ramp.
Yeah.
ACT, SAT, college prep. And I'm like, but how many kids in today's, as you mentioned, soft skills, technology, are forming their own companies, are developing their own video games, are doing these entrepreneurs at early ages? I mean, YouTubers. And my daughter's on Twitch. I mean, she wants to be a streamer. She's like no different than anyone else at that age, right?
Yeah.
But they are making a living at streaming, and some of them aren't finishing high school or going to college to do these things. And so, as you've pointed out, Trevor, when is the school system going to catch up and go, okay, we need to revamp? Because as you pointed out, there's so many measures of successes. Reevaluate. Look at what you said. Here's the top 5 things that our companies want for employers, for future employers. Here's what we need. And I feel like, unfortunately, the pandemic would be the perfect, I'll use the air quote, excuse to hit Control-Alt-Delete and blow this sucker up. Not literally. And let's say, okay, let's start over. Let's have different measures of successes. Let's focus on connections as much as content. Let's get all of those things. And I feel like, as you said, Trevor, if this was one opportunity as a pause on the lineage of education, here's a great opportunity to kind of reassess and step back. Because unfortunately, I don't know how your experience has been, Trevor, but as you mentioned earlier, forget about live people. Teaching and preaching relationships and connections in schools was already a difficult road to be on for the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. You coming into a pandemic and starting schools mid-pandemic, I feel less valued than ever in the work that we do.
Yeah.
But yet people are saying out loud, don't forget, kids haven't been in school for like 6 or 7 months. Don't forget to build those connections, social emotional learning. I mean, we're talking about it, but yet I'm not even talking about it from a business, but we've had less interactions with school districts. And I get it that safety is number one. I get all the stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm like, imagine how popular we were. Trevor, we could not keep up with the business pre-pandemic. And now the pandemic hit, and this would be the time you would like reach and lean in to relationships and connections with kids. And yet it's crickets.
Yep. I know.
I'm like,
and I think a lot of people think like, oh, because it's virtual, you can't build relationships anymore. It's like, no, it's quite opposite. Like, you have different types of space to do it now. And like, you're right. Like, you know, we have to lean into like, okay, the reality is school looks different right now. Mm-hmm. It won't be like this forever, but right now, a lot of people are teaching from a laptop screen, or a lot of people are teaching behind masks, or there, of course there's obstacles, but it's like, you know what? We have Zoom meetings. There's no excuse why every teacher can't have at least 5 minutes of one-on-one time with a kid once a month. You know what I mean? Time to say, hey, I want to schedule with you at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. I just want to sit down and I want to ask some of these questions. How are you really doing? What's it been like at home? What's something I can do for you? You know what I mean? Maybe take notes on that call and send them a handwritten letter saying, hey, I loved hearing about your little sister. I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Like that's not that hard. Or what if you had small group meetings once a week online to where you have like 5 kids and every week you meet with those kids and it's just catch up and it's talking, it's asking questions. You know, what if you took some of these essays you're going to have students write anyway, and you give an SEL component to them. And so you're very intentional about asking about their own lives and asking about what they're interested in, and really making sure that we're hitting those emotional connections with kids while we're in this virtual space. I mean, I just think that there's things that we can be doing to continue to build relationships which is going to amplify student engagement. And we can do it in this virtual space. And to say you can't is really a cop-out. Now, is it the exact same? Is it as effective? I don't know. But it's obviously, it's possible. And so therefore we've got to prioritize it if we want learning to be successful.
I was listening to the Cult of Pedagogy podcast and with Jennifer, and Dave Stewart was on there, and he talked about MGCs, moments of genuine connection. And he also mentioned, and he made it really simple, like we talked about earlier, when you say sometimes, Trevor, your message is so simple, but yet complex, right? But he said, he told the listeners on the podcast, he said, have you ever been inspired, affirmed, celebrated by a text message or an email, or, you know what I mean? And so he just went through those things. And when he broke it down there, Trevor, you're like, well, of course. And then he's like, so why is this so dang hard? Because everything that we've been to be able to celebrate and connect and affirm, and you felt connected with your loved ones and others, you've been able to do that through FaceTime and text messages and emails. And he said, so why are we not looking at just saying this is the same thing that can happen in the classroom? Yes. So I think you just have to, his call to action was, whether you're on Google or Zoom or whatever platform, find the tools that you have, understand the tools that you have. And as you've pointed out, Trevor, then find what he calls MGCs, moments of genuine connection, that 5-minute conversation with that kid, that once a week with a small group, whatever it is. And he also mentioned, there was a study, I'm going to paraphrase, but you mentioned earlier about like embedding things into the writing that you were going to do. He referenced the study there, Trevor, that said, I think it was 67% increase, where students increased their writing skills by having verbal feedback versus written feedback. It was like 2/3. And so what he was saying is we're already on this platform of where if you could give your students not written feedback, but verbal feedback on their written assignments. So we're in a situation where, unfortunately, is our realistic part of how we're having to teach, but there are some pros to this if we could just tap into it and see past the barriers versus anything else. Are you seeing and experiencing the same things?
Oh, 100%. And by the way, there is a great new Google extension that I've found. It's called Mote, M-O-T-E. Okay. And you can actually leave verbal feedback on students' work. And so it's awesome. Instead of typing it out, you can actually talk to them and share it. And it's like, here's a tool that didn't exist before 2020 that now exists, that's going to amplify student learning in brand new, amazing ways. And it's like, we just got to take advantage of it. It's a new ball game.
Well, and it was interesting, and I tell people this all the time. I had vocal surgery in February, so I was shut down from not speaking for about 10 days. And then, pandemic came. I was left to doing Zooms, and I had taken a whole week's of trainings, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, across the country. Instead of traveling, I had to be in my office and do this. And I will tell you, Trevor, I even went into, and I tell people very vulnerable, I went in like, this is going to suck. You mean like there's no way. And I went in with Monday with a poor attitude. Only like 7 screens were turned on. It just, and then I started recognizing, like, hey, Kevin, come on, we can find ways to do this. By Tuesday, I was starting to say, right, Trevor? I was using people's names. I was like, hey, was that your dog in the background real quick? Can you say, was that, by Friday, seriously, it took 5 days, Trevor. By the end of Friday, I was like, I can do this, and I'm loving this now. I am finding my groove in this, using their names, calling on them, putting them in small groups. I'm just like, we can do this. It may not be the exact same, but they're still going to leave going, hey, that was the best Zoom professional development I've ever had.
Sure,
I'm like, hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, I've been doing keynotes virtually, and like, listen, I love being in groups in the room with teachers. I just love it. There's this energy to it. There's this relationship that we all share with each other, because we've all had these experiences that no other profession can relate to. And so there's something about being with people in person where there's this exchange of energy that's really hard to put your finger on. And it's something that I absolutely deeply miss right now. I miss it. And yet virtually, there is a form of that connection that still happens. You know what I mean? Like I still can do a Zoom meeting and find ways to get people to put their phones down and lean in and pay attention. Like there's still ways of telling stories and being overly enthusiastic and passionate that still gets people to engage on different levels in ways that are similar to being in person. Now, is it exactly like being in person? No. Do I like it as much as being in person? Personally, no. But it's still possible. And so like, if that's what's been true for me the last 6 months of having to convert everything here, I know it's the same with teachers and their students too. It's like, yeah, it's different. But what I really took away from what you just shared was, I think it boils down to intentionality. Mm-hmm. Like it didn't take a lot of effort for you to start using people's names or talking about their dogs in the background or whatever. All you had to do was actually just make sure that you were intentional. Like, okay, it doesn't take a lot of effort to hear her share her name, but I've got to make sure that I'm doing it. Right. You know what I mean? And we can do the same with students. It doesn't take a lot of effort to ask kids how they're doing, or to say, hey, before we start every virtual meeting, I'm going to ask kids what's good. Share one good thing about your day or life, and take 5 minutes to do that. Yeah, it eats up 5 minutes of a 55-minute class, but you know what? Like if you can get kids warmed up that way and show some genuine interest in their lives, the next 55 minutes or the next 50 minutes is going to be so much better. Yeah. And it just takes intentionality.
So it's interesting you said that, because again, we've never crossed paths professionally, but that's one thing that I definitely preach, because I came up with this quote phrase. I said, you can't wing relationships. Yeah. So, and too many of us, if you're natural at it, Trevor, then you can wing it. You can be like, oh, I can slip it in here, and at the beginning, or I didn't get it at the beginning, but you're good at it. But for those 80% of the teachers that just tell me what to do, I'm like, look, I have what I call a connection calendar. And so what they do is I ask them to write, how are you going to connect with your kids on Monday?
Love that.
If you don't have a plan, you're going to wing it. And then what I try to do is I use it like weight loss. Because, as adults, we try, you look like you're in good shape. I've had to lose 17 pounds. I've had to lose 17 pounds in this pandemic. But what I will tell you, and they had to be intentional.
And I've gained about 17 pounds during this pandemic. But anyway.
You hide it well under that hoodie. But I will tell you, so it's interesting, Trevor, is I tell them it's just like weight loss, and the light comes on. I said, if you didn't have a plan at what you were going to work out or how you were going to eat today, you would just wing it. And isn't it the days that you go, oh, I'm just not going to eat carbs today, free pizza and free donuts show up, or, you can't. So what I tell them is, what are you going to do today to connect with kids? Are you going to, and we have what we call 60-second relay breaks. They take literally 1 minute, 2-minute connections. That's a whole class connection, and 90-second spark plans. So what we try to teach them is, you can connect with kids in less than 2 minutes a day. All you have to do is pick which tool you're going to do it. When are you going to insert it into your class time, beginning, middle, end, whatever, and then start to do it on a regular basis, because then it becomes in the fabric. It's intentional now. Once it becomes so intentional, it becomes second nature. Now you don't have to think about it. It's what you do. Then you'll be one of those teachers like, oh, I just naturally connect, where 6 months ago, I didn't do that. Yeah. So I love the fact that you brought up intentionality, because that's the only way I can get what I call the next part is sustainability. Because how many teachers bring us in, or campuses bring us in, Trevor, and then we're one and done. We preach and teach a message, and then all of a sudden we're done, and they're like, oh, that was great for the 48 hours, and then we're back to normal. And so how are we going to get sustainability? I came up with this phrase, and I want to ask you this before we go into what you're doing now, is this: build your school on a rock of relationships, not the sand of initiatives.
Yes.
And here's what I mean by this. I'm a little bit outside the box thinker, and I'm not attacking SEL. I'm talking about like social emotional learning. Think about it. Right now, mid-pandemic, we need social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, race, culture, diversity. There's so many things that have happened in our real lives that we need to be able to meet those needs in the school system. My philosophy, though, is that even with social emotional learning, all of those things that I just described, which are great resources for educators and needed, but you realize all of those come in a curriculum lesson-based form. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, this is me, lesson-based curriculums blend relationships, where if you think about it, what if I build a relationship? How are we going to talk about social emotional needs, race, culture, diversity if we don't even know each other?
Mm-hmm.
My fear is that some schools are quickly going out and grabbing those huge initiatives, those big initiatives, but they're bags of sand, and they're just going to bring them in because, one, they got to spend their money, two, they got to meet the students' needs, they got to check the box. But have they forgotten, what about building the foundation of a rock of relationships, and then bringing social emotional learning on top of it, then bringing race, culture, diversity, trauma, all of the other things that we definitely need in our school system. But I think sometimes we forget the rock of relationships gives us that strongest foundation to land those initiatives that we bring into the schools. What's your thought?
Oh, 100%, 100%. You know, I remember a school district in my area got a $50 million bond to just revamp their entire school. So they built this huge new wing, millions of dollars in furniture and technology. It was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And in the hallways, there were all these booths where kids could sit and face each other. And in the classrooms, they had all of these amazing flexible furniture. It was just the most beautiful stuff you could ever see. And yet, I remember when I went to go tour that school and help them out with some stuff and consulting, I went there, and every single classroom you looked into, kids are still sitting in rows, and the teacher's at the front of the room, and the kids are sitting in $1 million furniture, and they're all just looking at the teacher at the front of the room. Sit and get. And it was like, this looked exactly what school looked like for me in the 90s. It looked exactly what school looked like in the 40s for my grandpa. Like, there was no difference except that it was really shiny furniture and technology. And I remember, like, there was like this phrase that popped into my head, is that innovation without a foundation is worthless. You know what I mean? Like, you can have all of the initiatives and technology in the world and pedagogy and processes. You can have all of that. But if you don't have a foundation that it's all built on, it's just going to crumble. It's not going to stand. You know, I talk about this in my project-based learning workshop, is that there are a lot of fads in education. You know, I often say, like, fads are like bottle flipping and pogs. You know what I mean? Like, you remember bottle flipping when everybody's flipping bottles? Or do you remember pogs in the 90s, everybody? And it was a huge distraction. And it's like, yeah, but you know what? Just wait. The spinners will go out of style. Like, the fad will pass. And it's like, so often that's what you see in education. Oh, we're going to do this big initiative, and we're going to bring in project-based learning. Or we're going to do this initiative, and we're going to talk about race relations. Or we're going to talk about, we're going to use this new technology, this new tool, whatever it is. And then it's like, you just wait 3-4 years. There'll be a new principal, and we'll have a brand new fad to work with. Or just wait 3 more years, a new technology will come out and the other one's obsolete. And all educators know this. And so, like, what you often see is this innovation without a foundation. And I think you just hit it right on the head, is that the foundation for great learning in any environment, whether it's in school, whether it's at a corporation or a company, whether it's a sports team, I bet you could speak to that as a coach, is relationships. Like, that is the foundation. Without that, nothing else has the potential to succeed as much as it possibly could. And maybe that's a strong opinion and take that we have, but I'm with you on that one. I mean, is that true in the sports world?
Oh, absolutely. No, and that's why. And so what's really interesting is, and I'm going to be really transparent here. The reason that I titled this relationship centered learning is I'm actually going towards that. And for 2021, we have been national educators for restorative practices. And Trevor, unfortunately, there's pros and cons to using those terms. Mm-hmm. Some school districts will easily come towards us because we're about restorative practices, and they hear relationships and accountability and repair harm. But there are some school districts that said, we don't want to have anything to do with you guys because when they hear the word restorative, they're anti-restorative, right? Mm-hmm. And so forget the politics, forget left or right. I literally, this was true one time, Trevor. I had a guy tell me, he said, Kevin, I love what you're bringing. Unfortunately, my central office would never buy into this. And I said, okay. I said, hey, do me a favor. I'm going to go home and send you something. I went home, Trevor, and I typed out a synopsis of what we do, right? Yep. And I titled it at the top, RAP. And I sent it to him. And he said, oh my God, I love this. And I said, right. And I called it Relationships Accountability Program.
There we go.
And he said, oh my God, my central office would be all over it. I said, it's the exact same thing. I just retitled it, right?
So
And so,
silly.
well, it's so silly, Trevor, but what you just pointed out is, unfortunately, and I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast, so this is going to be the first time my listeners are going to hear this. Restorative has been such a foundational change for me. I tell people all the time, I didn't flip. I just started calling new plays and started getting up. I tell people sometimes you're stuck with a 1999 playbook in 2020, right?
Yep.
And so what I started realizing is look, restorative, using the term restorative has its limitations. And here's why, because there's a connotation that it's soft on discipline. It's an alternative approach, or as you just mentioned, it's a fad. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hear this a lot, Kevin, this pendulum's going to swing. This is going to be gone, in 3 to 5 years, and it's going to be something else. And I said, okay. So what I feel like on the wall of education, on the caveman archaic wall of education, there are some acronyms that have lasted for generations and what I've been called etched. They actually went in there and etched, certain acronyms, right? And SEL will be one of them.
Sure.
And so I want to make this very clear. I'm not against SEL. I'm saying I want to be like SEL. I want to be an acronym that embeds in education and makes long-term changes. Unfortunately, my 5 years in experience working in restorative, I feel like I'm a Sharpie on the wall. Like, in other words, I'm the big, bold Sharpie. I'm on the wall. I'm making a difference, but there are a lot of people are like, oh, it's just tag, and that'll fade away like anything else. And it made me realize, Trevor, relationships. If I called it RAP and the guy was like, dude, that's it, that I would be all over it. I'm like, well, then, so what I've run into is I've run the course of understanding that if I want to go forward, and this was pre-pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, then I have to have a rock of foundation of relationships. Yep. And that never goes away. So that's why I chose relationship-centered learning as my platform moving forward, because relationships at the center of all learning, the rock of relationships, has been here since the time of education. And it is in like you said, it bleeds over into professional, personal, families, relationships, everything. So I don't want to hear relationship-centered learning is a fad. I want to hear it as the rock. I want to hear it as a foundation, and it should never have gone away. And it still should be the center of learning as we move forward. And again, pandemic gives us that great platform to finally say, let's control, alt, delete. Let's renew, and let's figure out how to get these relationships and connections back at the center of learning, because it's been pushed to the side for too long. That's my thought.
I love it. Absolutely.
All right, brother. Well, hey, I want people to know not only what you're doing for the people that you contract with, but you have some virtual opportunities and some ways for people to get involved with Trevor. So can we talk? This is your time to tell people what you're up to. No, this is why I wanted you on the show. I want people also to know. I'll tell you, I already sent your virtual online class to my people. And awesome. Said, hey, take a look at it. So no, I want people to know how we can get involved with you and what you're up to and how they can kind of learn a little bit about what you're talking about, just like I am.
Yeah. So I just released, I don't know when this is being released, this podcast, but I just released here in mid-September a new course for virtual teachers, because it's so abundantly clear that most people didn't go to school to become a virtual teacher. Most people didn't do their student teaching from a laptop screen. And so there are a whole host of new challenges and unknowns and about how to do this well. I know one of the things that's always kept me afloat as a teacher and educator is the successes that you see in the classroom. It might be a really hard class, but then when you see these individual successes, that's what helps fill you up and keeps you going. And yet in the virtual space, some of those successes look different and they're not received in the same way. And so it's like, well, how do you thrive as a virtual teacher? How do you manage your time well? How do you simplify curriculum and focus on what's most important? How do you build relationships with students behind a screen and using Google Voice? What tools and resources can make your students' lives easier and therefore your life easier? How do you manage assessment? All of these big questions. How do you take care of yourself when you're working from home or working alone in your classroom and you're isolated and you're putting in more time and you have more to grade and more students? How do you do all of this well and still be successful and not just have to bide your time until pandemic teaching is over? but actually thrive during it. And so I created an online course, which is 8 modules, about 15, 16 videos that are just walk you through these big topics, and then activities and tools to help you with it. And so, yeah, that's released now. And I've kept it really, I've tried to keep it as affordable as possible, because the idea is can you make sure every virtual teacher has the opportunity to thrive? And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. And I think the course would definitely be a way to help people learn some new ideas and practices in this very temporary, but also very real unknown. So yeah, I can share the link with you, but I'm really proud and excited about having this course out there.
No, I love it. I love the fact that one thing that I have not been able to really do yet, but it has been talked around me for years, is getting with new teachers. Like Kevin, you mentioned you're working with the university. I've had a couple, I only have a master's, I don't have a doctorate, but I've had some undergraduate talk about teaching this relationship style course as a prerequisite for some teachers, or even alternative. And so I would love to get into that space, because how many teachers, if we can get this information that you are bringing and I'm bringing in front of them proactively, so that they have it in their toolbox and on their tool belt, and the mindset of understanding what it's going to take with a modern day student to connect with them, and understanding those 5 things, as you mentioned, I think teachers could come into education more wide open, eyes wide open.
Well, and let's be honest, in the past, this wasn't possible. In the past, you couldn't create a virtual online course that's easy to use. But now we've got that technology, just like what we said earlier. Like in the past, building relationships with students in a distance learning environment would have been really, really difficult. Like when I was a senior in high school, a hurricane knocked down my high school and it knocked down my house, and I had to live in a FEMA trailer for an entire 8 months. But for 1 month of it, there was no electricity, no power, and we had no school for a time. And so we were out of school my senior year for over a month. And I had zero contact with my teachers during that time. And it's like, if that happened now, of course, it'd still be a tragedy. It'd still be difficult. But like, teachers have ways now to connect with kids that we didn't have back in the early 2000s, right? Like those things didn't exist back then. It's like, so we've got this blessing of technology, which can also be a curse sometimes, but it's also a blessing. And so now it's like, how do we take advantage of that? I would love to go and sit down with teachers all over the place and talk about, how do you thrive as a virtual teacher? How do you build relationships with kids? How do you make that a foundation? I'd love to get back on an airplane and go and travel and be with teachers, but we can't right now. And so it's like, all right, well then what do we do otherwise? Right. And so that's what the course is an attempt to do. And I'm really excited that it's just another way we can just kind of help people figure out, how do you thrive as a professional during this difficult time?
Well, man, I want to thank you for not just the course, for helping, in my opinion, this is Kevin talking, in my opinion, you have helped myself and many other educators figure out how to thrive. You have done it in so many different platforms. You're an amazing storyteller. You have genuine and authentic, real stories, and you're not afraid to be vulnerable with your listeners and your followers. And the fact that you are consistently trying to figure out, as you're growing with it and with education, that's what I admire about you. I think that you are one, as I said, one of the top 25 people that when I first launched this podcast, my producer was like, who would be in your top 25? And I'm not just saying it because I was literally Trevor Muir.
No, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And so I just was like, what you've given us is you've given us, to me, those gentle reminders at times, but powerful reminders to not lose focus, or to not give up hope, or to not lose it, to not flip our lid, or to not even leave education. I think, Trevor, for many of us, I have used your voice through my platform at times to say, listen to what he has to say. And I think, and I think it's made a difference for not just my listeners, but for me personally. You have inspired me. You have given me confidence and reminders that when I took this journey and left public education and tried to navigate through trying to be whatever an educational consultant is, I just had to tell people I'm just an educator trying to make a difference, but I don't know how to do it in this world because this world's completely different. But I want to thank you because what you've also done is you've given me a light and an encouragement that this isn't being done for nothing, that we can make a difference. In the fact that you've created a virtual course, the fact that you're still out there making differences, your videos, the people. So we're going to put in the show notes, Trevor, we're going to put everything that you want us to, as far as a link to there, a link to connect with you on social media, all of the things, a way to follow with you. We want to make sure every one of our listeners gets an opportunity. If they haven't already been inspired by you, I want them to hear you, and I want them to hear your message and what you are about. And I want them to start understanding how powerful the message that you bring can help educators get back up off their feet or stand tall in what they're doing. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thanks, Kevin. That means so much. I'm honored by that. And yeah, it's just an honor that I get to be part of other people's lives and their careers. And so many people are a part of mine and they have no idea. I'm inspired regularly by people that have no clue that they've touched me. I'll go back to that Mr. Peters. I talk about that guy all the time. I've made videos about him. He's in my keynote. He's in my book, my first book, The Epic Classroom. He is a huge part of my story, and a lot of people have heard that story, and yet I cannot for the life of me find that guy. He's not on social media. He's not on the internet. I cannot find Mr. Peters. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing. Not that I can't connect with him, because I will at some point. I'm going to figure it out. But it's more that guy planted a seed in this 12-year-old, and he has no idea that like it led me on this journey and on this path. He's just living his life, hopefully knowing that he had an impact on a lot of kids throughout his career, but he doesn't know it. And I think that's just something that all teachers have to keep in mind, that you might not always see, sorry for being cheesy, what that tree grows into. But what you are doing is planting those seeds. That if you water them and keep giving them opportunities, at some point they will grow, whether you get to see it or not. And that is the beautiful work of a teacher. And so thank you. I appreciate it. And I love this conversation. This was a good one. Very rarely does anybody want to have a podcast and talk for an hour anymore, especially in the teacher world. So I like it.
Well, good. I appreciate your time today as an investment. That was one thing I told myself. I wasn't going to box myself with a number or a certain minute, whatever the conversations were. They were for you, for me, and my listeners, Trevor. I know we're going to take away a lot of great things from our message today, and being inspired and encouraged, but also being informed. And I always say this: power and permission. I think what we both are trying to do is empower our teachers with permission to say, you can do this.
Yeah.
And it can be done. And it's not impossible. But as we talked about earlier, being intentional, having a plan, and using resources. If you're not familiar with them, learn. And this is a great opportunity for us to learn. So I'm glad, Trevor, that you've created something for us to all follow in your footsteps and learn about how to become a better online teacher, but also just how to be a better person, Trevor. Thank you for what you do. Thanks for being on the show, and we'll connect with you next time.
Yep. Thanks so much, Kevin. Bye, everybody.
Take care. All right, brother. That was it.
Cool.
Man.
Good stuff.
Yeah, man. Great. That went really well for me. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I don't
get to do this very much. And as I said, I guess selfishly created this show because I said I got to connect with people. And I can't, as you said, I was traveling 150 days a year, and I was like,
150?
Yeah, Trevor. I
thought I had a lot at like 90, 150.
Yeah. I also get subcontracted for a company called BER, Bureau of Education Research. And so they subcontract me, but I get to do me. And I get to be NEDRP, and I get to, it's my same message that they just subcontract me. But that put me, I have schools in Hawaii all the way to New York. So from farther west to east.
Yep.
And what it does is it gives me a platform where I can share my message, and then they can either bring me back through BER, or they can contact me directly, and I get to solicit my own, like, hey, here's my own information.
That's sweet.
I write a handbook. So that's really, to be honest, that's what got me going more national, was I'm in Chicago or I'm in Michigan or wherever I'm at, and I get to preach and teach. Yep. And I started putting in person, so we didn't share this, but I grew up into drugs and alcohol. All of my brothers are dead because of drugs and alcohol. I started smoking at 9 and cocaine at 12. My parents didn't touch it. My dad was in the military. I'm 8.5 years younger than all of my siblings. So I was the accident is what they like to call me.
Uh-huh.
And so I grew up hanging around with my siblings. That's all they did is they partied. So I drank and I smoked and I did coke and I did that, but
Yeah.
I didn't know any different. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't call it trauma. I was just like, that was living. And,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
it's just crazy. And then my first brother died at 33, smoking pot in his bedroom, and his heart stopped. And he left a family of 4, and all 4 of those kids are addicted to drugs and alcohol. My
Oh.
next brother died in hospice of HIV and hepatitis C. IV drug user, shared dirty needles with dirty people, lifestyle caught up with him. Oldest brother went out partying. Who's the one who introduced me to cocaine? He lived in Colorado. He was an oil field coal miner, real roughneck type guy. But he would do 7 days on, 7 days off, make a lot of money. And on 7 days off, he would party.
Yeah.
Pulled his car in one night from partying. The car didn't go off, so the carbon monoxide got him before he passed out.
Oh.
And so I tell you this because my parents have passed, my brothers have passed. But what made the difference for me is 7th grade. I had coaches and teachers started talking to me about, you're smart, you're strong, you're fast, and it was like different talk than, hey, do you want to go party and drink? And so I tell people all the time, I knew I wanted to be an educator after Miss Bagby. I didn't know what kind of educator, but when I went through middle school and I got into high school and I graduated from high school, I looked back and I said, I'm a better human being because of my coaches. Like they took me under their wing and they taught me the difference between right and wrong. And my dad was gone from the time I was 7 till he came home when I was 15, my parents, all these things. And so it was just crazy. But I always say educators gave me the strongest platform of understanding, love, connections, relationships. And so that's why I got into it, was because I'm the only living male now. And I'm the only one and not addicted. I tell people the only thing I think I'm addicted to is chocolate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was educators made.
I love it.
They saved my life. I tell them I could have easily been a statistic and been with them. But teacher said, say no to drugs. You're smart. You're fast.
Yeah.
You're good. You're different. We care about you. Don't be like your brothers. And I was like, oh, no one had ever said that to me, Trevor.
Uh-huh.
So
yeah, and that's what it's always like. It's head scratcher, like how so many teachers don't get that though. It's like, listen, like you have a captive audience here.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like you have this opportunity to give grace and to receive grace with these students. It's like, do it. Like, and so I love that you're making a whole career out of it now, that you have a whole career out of this.
I didn't
probably
see
lucrative.
it has been
prior to pandemic, man.
Oh God.
It's killer, man.
I had 2 employees and 10 subcontractors.
Jeez.
We've been in over 100 school districts. I was a one-man band. Then I grabbed 2 people. Then I couldn't keep up, and I grabbed 5, and then 10. Well, we literally finished 2019 with the highest sales, not profit sales, but we did $2 million of sales in 2019.
Oh, good for you! Wow.
And the pandemic hit. I think we may. And that was probably pre-pandemic. Even in January, we did quite a bit, but we may do 500,000 in sales for the whole next year, going from 2 million to 500. And I know, and I will tell you, but that people don't understand. Like I was like, I just don't want to lose my house because I have no residual income.
Uh-huh.
I don't have another way to make income.
That's why I'm doing. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this course is like, I need passive income. I mean, all of my contracts I had before COVID, mostly converted to virtual.
Yeah.
Some of them took a 25% pay, but I mean, like still, so there was we had 30 something gigs that still stuck, but now I'm taking all these like $500 gigs.
Oh, me too.
Stuff that I wouldn't normally do, but I'm like, keep the lights on.
Well, no. And I got a COVID disaster loan was the only thing that kept me afloat.
Yeah.
And so, no, we created, so right in the middle of the pandemic, I sent green screens and mics to all of my presenters, and we created a 7.5 hour virtual training of all of our tools. I did the intro, I do the outro, they do all the tools in the middle. And we tried to make that for our customers to supplant, just like in the middle. And some grabbed it and some didn't. It's still out there.
It's hard. It's all hard, and people aren't wanting to spend money on that stuff right now. And I'm just like, folks, like it's not a huge investment. That's why I'm trying to do district licenses with my course. So I'm really pushing them.
So what we did, Trevor, is we did it basically, I did a price point. If it's over a certain amount, You can
Yep.
get it for $100 per person. So about the
Okay,
same
yep.
price point as yours at, right? So
$65. Yep.
yeah. I mean, yours is less than 100. So what we
Yep.
were saying is we can get it less than 100 if we get higher numbers.
Yeah.
So I just did a sliding scale. So from 1 to 50 is this, or 50 to 100 is this. And
Yep.
so I think, but the most we charge is 150 for this 7.5 hours. We did Think Thicket is a platform that we
Yeah,
use.
I've seen it. Yep.
So we built a module, you watch the video, then you take the quiz and you do the handouts and just same thing. But we tried to make it affordable. And I have had some school districts say, we want to do, 200 people, where you're like, okay, I've had some $20,000, $30,000 contracts for some districts that want to do something. But what's interesting is there's one or two and that's it. And then nobody wants to do anything else. And so, as you've pointed out, I was like, all of a sudden I told my team last week, I was kind of like in a lull. I said, I've never felt so insignificant in a long time. Like, I feel like I'm not I'm doing blogs now. I hired a marketing company and I would tell you, I get crickets.
But you know what? If it can give you any consolation, I've talked to Todd Neslony, Adam Welcome, John Spencer, Gary Brooks, all these my friends. Nobody's doing work right now.
I know.
No, or if they are, it's virtual and it's paying pennies, and that's just the crap we're in right now. And we just
I know. I know.
It's just the way it is. And so that's why I'm like, you know what? I've got one maybe in person coming up soon, but like everything's virtual and nobody I don't know. It's just a tough time.
I know. I agree with you, man. But hey,
it's the business.
It is a business, but I do want to tell you, seriously, I am not BSing you, man. You have been like this person in my background. I have shown your videos, man. And I have
so sweet. I love it.
And it was like, I show you, and I got to meet Ron Clark when he was our keynote and our speaker. The message that you guys said, as you said, is simple, but complex, but it's you say it in a way that I can't say it. And I'm like, listen to Trevor. And then when you say it, right, it reinforces my message. And so I don't know if you realize, for me, man, you have just been such like your sixth grade teacher. Trevor in my background is walking around doing
Kevin, that's so cool.
But every single day embedded into my keynote is one of your videos. And the one that you did where the helicopters, the spinners were like the summer, is it coming back from the summer? The one
about building relationships in week one
or no, 6,400 and whatever seconds. It was like time, how much time teachers invest. And you're like,
I
don't know what, but anyway,
200 of them
I know that's what I said, but I used to show that because it just, you've done such a great job of either bookending or modeling.
That's awesome.
One of our messages that we've come up with, and we're like, look at this is out here. Trevor's, and then we just point people back to you. So Joe Beckman, have you met Joe Beckman?
Boy, that sounds familiar. I don't think so, but
I will tell you, Trevor, gentleman you need to meet. His name is Joe Beckman.
All right, let me write that down.
He is a non-educator, but he speaks to educators. All you have to do is watch one video called The Calling. His name is Joe Beckman. He is actually, if I'm not mistaken, he's in Minnesota.
Okay.
And he is what I call the human connector. He is on my first podcast. He is just an amazing human being. He wears a backwards hat. He wears flip-flops and jeans. He plays a guitar. He comes and talks. All he talks about is building relationships and connections. He does it for staff. He does it for students.
Sweet. I'll have to check him out.
This guy, you need to make a connection with him. He does keynotes. He does all these things. He is on my first episode of the podcast. So,
sweet. Okay.
Yeah. So episode 1, hands down, the best episode I've had so far as initiating. But he talks about not being extraordinary, being ordinary. And he tells us how to be vulnerable with teachers by doing FORD. Either talk about your family, an occupation, a recreation, or a dream.
Okay.
So he literally listen to episode 1 of my podcast.
That's awesome. I will. That's great.
But Joe Beckman, man, is a person that I think when I put you up there, he is right up there.
Oh, that's awesome.
He is making a difference. He would be a great person to connect with. He cares about new teachers.
Joe Beckman. All right.
Joe Beckman. And I will tell you, I would love, and I'm just saying, Trevor, I would love if you could put somebody like me, you, Joe Beckman, and whoever else, I wish we could all come together collectively and create. I know it's got to be online something now, but my point is something specific though for new teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? Like,
well, and I did a lot of work this summer, and then I decided it wasn't the right time with all the racial stuff going around.
Sure.
Me and a friend of mine, we were going to start something called the New Teacher Academy.
Right.
So I've got a lot of stuff put together on it. We were going to do a big conference, and Gary Brooks was going to come. And then with all the civil rights stuff, I was like, oh, this is not a good time for 3 white guys to throw a conference. And so
I agree. So but I do believe that there will be a time where we can come back.
Well, let's do it.
Let's collaborate and let's come up with a new I think there's nobody in that really space.
I know.
Everybody's doing in-house PDs themselves and, and trying to just, develop it.
I know. It's story myself. Yep. I'm with you.
Okay. Well, just know I'm interested in.
I love it.
And just know, Trevor, and I'm going to say this before I could talk to you forever, but I will tell you, I got to do Joe. I do Joe Dombrowski at 2:00.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
I know Joe's been in my living room right behind me.
I will definitely tell you to say hello. Joe is coming on at 2:00.
Oh, awesome.
But no, here's what I want to say. I want you to know this. Even though I have struggled financially in this, the one thing that I learned in 5 years of doing this is I have learned to not do it for the money.
Mm-hmm.
I think when people say, how did you get the company to grow? I would give trainings away for free.
Yes.
I would take all of the income and I would take it back and buy backpacks, washers, dryers. Like I was actually in a second master's in Christian ministry. I thought I was going to go into youth ministry. And I realized,
by the way.
Okay. So
Young Life. I was going to go into Young Life, but yeah.
Well, after doing fellowship of Christian athletes as a coach, I started realizing youth ministry was such a powerful calling to me. So I literally went back to school as a master's and started taking it. I got through all Old Testament, New Testament disciple classes. And then for whatever reason, I felt like God really just softened my heart to be like, it's okay. And then God revealed to me later in life, like, this is your ministry.
Yeah.
This is why I have elementary, middle school, high school, principal, assistant principal, classroom teacher, instructional coach, and high school football coach. I got all of that diverse background and Christian ministry so that when I could come to teachers, the one thing I struggled at the beginning, and I don't know if you ever felt this, I was trying to go in and trying to convert people. Like, what do you mean you don't believe in relationships? And, I would get defensive. And God really softened my heart. And he said, it's not about converting, it's about conviction.
Yes.
So I tell people when I stand in front of them, I said, look, I'm not here to convert you today. I'm not here to convict. I'm not here to convert you. I'm not here to condemn you. And I'm not here to convince you.
Yeah.
So I'm not a salesman. I don't do this for the money. I don't get paid by conversion. I've already get paid. I'm here to convict you. I'm going to speak to your heart, but I'm so real that I tell them, look, if you're not convicted today, it's okay. You weren't ready to change. I'm planting seeds. Those of you that are going to take this information and take these tools, great. The ones you're not, I want to wish you well. I hope that you continue to find ways to be successful. My message today is not ready to be heard by everybody, but that's okay. And what God did to me was he really revealed and softened my heart was, it's your job to just plant the seeds. Let me take
share your own conviction and they can do what they want with it. That's right.
Absolutely. And can I tell you now, once I freed myself of that, like, what do you mean you're not buying into? I walk into rooms now and I just say, hey, God, open up my mind, open up their hearts, make me a vessel today and just fill the words of your spirit. And then I leave. And I've had people pray over me. I've had people say, I see you. I see what you're doing. Because I never directly mention God. Yeah. But it's Christ-like is what I'm trying to be. Yes. So
often people come up and be like, can I ask, are you a believer? I'm like, I didn't say anything about that. And they're like, yeah, I just knew though. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's his spirit.
Absolutely. So I leave every day going, you know what, today, God, I made a difference in someone's, whether somebody sends me an email, somebody put a note in my front pocket and walked up and just shoved it in my front pocket and walked off. And it said best convocation in 27 years. Yes. And I'm like, and I walk out and I said, thank you, God, because God knows how I'm wired. I need to hear that. That's how I'm wired. I need to hear I'm doing a good job. Yep. Words of affirmation, love. I fill my bucket. And so I tell people that's better than a paycheck. Now I'm with you. I still got to keep the lights on. I got to pay my mortgage. But at the end, I'm not trying to do this to make money. I'm actually trying to do it to make a difference. And because you don't know me, I wanted you to know why I threw out the idea of doing something for New Teacher. It's not to make money. We'll figure out how to make money. It is truly, Trevor, I want to make a difference. And I feel right now I'm handcuffed and stifled in making a difference on the way that I'm used to. So just know that's where that message came from, was just my idea of being a disruptor and a difference maker, not like, oh, I see dollar signs. I just need to be very, very, very transparent with people. So just know who I am as a person.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think it's a great idea. So like, yeah, I'm working on this project, and it's so weird. I worked so long on creating it, and now that it's launched, it's like I literally like changed jobs. Now I'm like, oh, I'm a salesperson now. You know what I mean? Or I'm a marketing expert, even though I'm not an expert at marketing. I'm not an expert at sales. And so I'm like, all right, I'm no longer the content creator. Now my job, and this is what I've been doing all day, is like, all right, how do I figure out Facebook ads? How do I get affiliates to sell my course? And so it's like, yeah. So once my capacity is freed up, I would love to chat.
Absolutely.
I think it's a real thing, and I think it is a need.
Oh, well said. Well, hey, brother, thank you for your time today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you too,
Enjoy
Ken.
the rest of your day, man.
All right, yes, ahead of Joe for me.
Absolutely, I sure will. And I will email you. I'm on episode, I think I've got 17 recorded. I'm only recording 3 or 4 more this week.
Okay.
But I'll specifically let you know, I have a production company in California that actually produces this. We'll edit the audio and we'll edit the video. We'll just put bookends on it, but it'll be housed on the website. But I'll get you the exact date when they're going to,
Sounds good, and I'll blast it out. So.
Yeah. Okay, brother. Have a great day.
All right. Take it easy. Peace.